Welcome to this briefing this afternoon, one and all, the Freedom Camping Policy Review, Issues and Options, and the need for a bylaw. I'll pass over to staff.
Kia ora. This one is on from a series of early discussions we've been having around freedom camping. And today we're starting to shape up the forward program. Freedom camping is obviously a really important topic for our district. And we have Leslie, who is going to be leading our review, and she's going to take you through our presentation today. I just want to note that there'll be a series of further briefings, so we won't cover everything you might be interested today, but if you do talk about something of interest, we will note it down so that when we come back to you, we can make sure we cover those things off. So with that, I'll hand over to Leslie.
Kia ora koutou. Cool, so just going back, you may recall we last met in June and had a workshop around the 4 key topics. Here we talked through all the interrelated elements around freedom camping. So we talked about the drivers, issues and opportunities with regards to compliance and enforcement, impacts, tourism and the freedom camping sites. So just extending a bit. What was the second ago? There we go. So just extending on that today a bit more, but really today is actually just focusing on the top left, which is just around the policy versus bylaw, is what we're going to focus on today. We'll bring this back up at the end, but just letting you know that really today for us is about looking for a steer on our proposed approach, which I'll be talking through, finding out if there's any more information that you need, as Chris mentioned. If you do have any questions, it'd be great if they could wait to the end. And one little question I've got there we'll talk about at the end is also what we could call a bylaw, just out of interest, which has been raised before. So with regards to a policy versus bylaw, as we've talked about previously, basically freedom camping is a growing activity and it will continue to impact our district in both positive and potentially negative ways based on recent evidence. So with the current policy that we have, the key issues that we've identified is that we currently take an educational approach, and this does not provide the appropriate tools to manage growing activity consistently and within legislative requirements. This impact is it undermines public confidence and trust in the fact that we're managing freedom camping well. So as a reminder, we've currently got 9 designated sites. It focuses on monitoring and we have limited powers of enforcement. So this is why we're seeing what we've talked about before, the impacts on the environment and the community and how we're managing that. Yep, sorry.
So just to add a little bit of flavour, previously we've also discussed as part of that educational approach, that's where we've been lucky enough to secure funding previously for our ambassadors. So as well as some of the monitoring that we've undertaken about those activities on those sites, we've used the services of those ambassadors to help provide information, to help educate those visitors to the district about the campsites and where they can go. But as Leslie mentioned there's a difference between, I guess, what the current policy is trying to do and direct and help people to locations versus the underlying Freedom Camping Act, which enables freedom camping more broadly to occur. So that's hence that educational process. And as Leslie's touched on, the challenges of that becoming increasing with those increasing numbers coming in and everyone wanting to come and visit our district, and how we just balance those.
Thank you. I mean to say Hamish is going to jump in when he feels like it as well.
We expect that.
So moving on and talking about a potential freedom camping bylaw. So basically under the Freedom Camping Act we have to meet 3 tests, and that's that we can only restrict or prohibit based on protection measures, which I'll talk a bit more about. It must be the appropriate way of addressing the problem and not inconsistent with the New Zealand Bill of Rights. I'll touch a little bit more on that in the next slide. The other thing with a new bylaw is that any new bylaw is that it initially must be reviewed after 5 years. So the purpose of that is so that if there's any kind of issues that have become very evident in the early days, it can be reviewed within that 5-year period or earlier if need be. So that's important to remember. Have just noted there about it's important to have the capacity to resource compliance with the bylaw. But of course, having a bylaw means that we will be in a better position to manage freedom camping in the sense that we'll be able to clearly indicate our restrictions and prohibitions. We'll be able to enforce and infringe where we need to. So our freedom campers are generally quite educated and they know the rules. So if we have a bylaw, they'll be aware of our ability to take action if we need to and the results of that. So the impacts there of a bylaw are pretty much all positive in the sense that what we can do, it opens up a wider range of offences, which is we can infringe if we need to. And ultimately, the goal there is it results in safe and practical sites that are not oversubscribed with minimal impact to local environment, because we have compliance officers that are empowered, and hopefully that will keep community happy as well. And Hamish would like.
Just to provide a bit of flavour for the difference between the policy and the bylaw. At the moment, we do have some powers under our general, the Litter Act and some other general provisions we have under other legislation to help address some of the issues that do arise relating to freedom camping. But there's a big difference compared to the additional suite of powers that we get under the Freedom Camping Act itself if we make a bylaw under that act. So that just enables those additional powers to be able to go in and do a bit more between the margins to what we can do now. And so that's quite important when we think about the increasing nature of activity occurring and just the ability to enforce some of those things over and above that previous education, talking, and kind of working alongside people. There's a bit more of an approach to follow up with the stick as well, where necessary.
Cool, thank you. So just going into a little bit more detail here. So sort of what we're saying today and what we're seeking to steer on is that our proposed approach is to proceed with a bylaw only. So there's a few different reasons for that. I'll just first touch on the determinations under the Freedom Camping Act, which are on the right-hand side there. So do we need to protect parts of the district where freedom camping may or may not currently occur? Just a high-level response for you today is that yes, our research indicates yes, because our community are telling us about the concerns and our compliance officers monitor the activity and see the impacts, and we know that activity is increasing. Is a bylaw the most appropriate and proportionate way of addressing the problem? We believe yes, because it enables us to restrict, prohibit and permit different forms of camping and provides the enforcement powers that enable us to best manage it. And would it be inconsistent with the New Zealand Bill of Rights? No, it wouldn't, because it's enabling freedom camping under the Freedom Camping Act provisions. Just a few more comments in terms of a policy versus bylaw approach. First of all, there is no requirement under the Freedom Camping Act for local authorities to have a freedom camping policy in support of a bylaw, so that's not a requirement. Managing freedom camping through a bylaw together with reserve management plans, which, as you'll be aware, are work in progress through our parks team, provides an overall comprehensive approach to managing freedom camping across the district. It's also interesting to note that of the 67 territorial authorities and city councils, only 2 have a policy only currently. 7 have a policy and a bylaw or work with a public places bylaw. So only 7 councils currently have a freedom camping policy, and 5 of those in combination with the bylaw. 43 councils have a freedom camping or similarly named bylaw. And although some councils use the public places bylaw to manage freedom camping, which is only 9, there are also some that have no mechanism at all, which is 15. So those are the areas that don't see it as an issue. We feel that we're best placed to develop a bylaw for our district. So it is quite different all around the country, depending on geographic regions and tourist numbers and things. If anyone wants any more information about what councils use what tools, I do have a specific list of exactly who's got what, if you're interested. Did you add anything to that? So that's pretty much covering off what the main focus today around the policy versus bylaw approach, and just going to touch on the other elements that we've previously covered. So in terms of the site assessment, so the freedom camping site assessment criteria and analysis. So we will be coming back to you on this in late November. This is pretty much the kind of chunkiest piece of work really in relation to the freedom camping bylaw, because it really comes down to, you know, what do we want to protect, what do we need to restrict and prohibit, what is basically just left open, you know, without constraints and so on. So it's quite a process that we've been working through, very robust process, and it's very important that we do a robust process because we need to ensure we meet all the requirements under the Freedom Camping Act with regards to our decision making in the space and the proposal that we'll put forward. So we have worked with consultants initially, we've done our own analysis, we've done site visits, we've been working with very closely with our iwi partnerships team and local iwi hapu for their input as well. So as mentioned, there's 3 key areas of protection when considering sites, and that's protecting the area, access to the area, and the health and safety of people visiting the area. And we also look at obviously other values around amenity value, recreational opportunities, tourist attractions, and so on. And as a result, we will come up with where we land. So the next briefing is worthy of going through all that in more detail in itself and presenting all those different sites. So that's what we'll be doing next time we come back. Just touching on impacts as well, so minimising impacts through implementation. So through all our site analysis that we've been doing, we've also been looking at the specifics, getting down to nitty gritty in terms of how many car parks would be appropriate, what size, what signage needs there are, what upgrades. So once again, we'll look to share more around that when we come back next time, because that relates to specific sites. But obviously, implementing what we tend to do is in a good way is very important. And then just touching on the tourism aspects, which we've talked before, opportunities. Once again, we can come back and talk more about this, but priorities really are around the sites that we land with in terms of restricted sites being, close to tourist attractions, for example, highlighting what we've got available that supports tourism, enabling longer stays. So as part of our site analysis, obviously looking at how long people are staying for, so that information will all come through next time, making sure we've got good amenities and infrastructure available, and so on.
Just with regards to the tourism facet, it's probably an important point just to make here that there are a number of elements that are considerations within that site assessment process that we're looking for, but a number of them actually sit strategically alongside the bylaw process itself, which reflects some of the linkages to the wider economic development destination management plan processes and objectives as well. So that strategic fit, and so a number of those will be areas that we're working up holistically, but might be more reflected into the supporting implementation and approach. So when we talk about how we provide information, how we make linkages, how we kind of support some of those opportunities, it's more that holistic approach, but we're looking at that as part of this collectively. But some of those you might not see specifically reflected in the bylaw that comes through, but the supporting material and ongoing implementation is a holistic package in totality.
Cool. So just moving on to timeframes. So things have adjusted a little since our last briefing or initial briefing back in February. As I was saying, it's quite a robust process and quite a detailed process with regards to the site analysis that we've been going through and engaging with our local iwi. So next steps will be that we come back late November to talk very specifically more about the sites and implementation and tourism aspects, and that will be ahead of then drafting up a bylaw looking for approval to consult in the new year, and that obviously follows on then with implementation and being fully operational by later next year.
So a point I just wanted to jump in a note here is that we had intended to be looking to, originally I think when we first briefed right back at the start of the year, to be looking to be able to introduce something ahead of this Christmas period, but it's taken longer to work through the assessment process. So we'll be looking to, as part of updating the dates and the next stages we're looking forward to now with that draft consultation process looking into the start of the next year, we'll be looking to update our website with the key stages following today as well, just to let you know, which will reflect those dates that are up on the screen in front of you.
Just as a side, something that's just come up in the last few days that we just mention is that MB have just opened a consultation in relation to the final transition date for our vehicles to be certified as self-contained under the new regulations that came into force in 2023. So originally there was a 2-year transition period where all vehicles needed to be certified and displaying the new, I think it's green stickers, by the 7th of June 2025. However, they have reported that to date of the estimated 73,000 vehicles that need to do this, only a small percentage have achieved this. And the main reason for this is because they have a new certification system in terms of, as part of the Gas Fitters and Plumbers Act, that they need to get certifiers on board, and they need to get up to speed, and then they need to get authorised to do that, and then they need to do the work. So that's obviously taking longer than they anticipated. So what they're proposing is that they shift this date by 1 or 2 years. So that means that people do not need to meet the new self-contained standards would not need to meet the new standards until middle of 2026 or 2027. So this doesn't impact our need for and development of a bylaw or our monitoring. It does mean that those that meet the old self-contained standard who are in that transition stage, how quickly they're going to rush to get self-contained, I don't know, but it means we'll likely continue to see those types of vehicles like vans, for example, that have got the blue self-contained sticker. So yeah, at this stage we haven't decided if we'll submit, but just bringing that to your attention that, yeah. Do you want anything on that? No. So just coming back to our points of discussion, it's really just seeking your steer on our proposal to develop a bylaw only, so that would be dropping the policy and just proceeding with just the bylaw. And then I've just thrown in there, if you've got any thoughts about what a bylaw should be called. It's something that was discussed at the workshop last time. Just to note, there is a trend moving towards more the terminology of responsible camping. That's the approach that MB is taking, so just something to consider. I mean, we don't have to decide right now, but I'm just throwing that out there as well. Yeah, did you want to add anything?
No, I guess just to emphasise that what we talk about here is the initial thinking that we're looking for a steer from, and of course we'll bring back the formal advice as part of the, shaped up the product as part of the consultation material. So this is the first big chunk about that policy bylaw, the instrument itself. And as Leslie said, the next big discussion will be what does that look like, what actually sits inside that as well. But they're both important factors, and we just wanted to split them up and walk through as the work's evolving. But we'll bring the totality of that back within the advice that we seek and provide for going out for consultation early in the new year.
Yep, so, yep. Oh, any questions? Welcome.
Any questions? Kathy?
Thank you. You're saying there that the community is unhappy. Just wondering what community? Is it the neighbours or is it the wider community? And what are they unhappy about?
Good question.
Yeah, so when we went through with our evidence gathering process, we looked at all our service requests over the past few years. We looked at our monitoring data from our compliance officers. We also undertook a survey summer before last. So it's a combination, to be honest. So those that are immediately impacted right next to sites, where they're experiencing negative effects such as noise and dust and oversubscribing, obviously those people are quite vocal about it, but also just general feedback around what people thought about freedom camping. But yeah, so yeah.
That also includes a tourism survey. When Leslie refers to the tourism survey, there was some questions specifically asked around what would potentially cause you to do more or see more. So that made some linkages to the ability to be able to stay longer as well, and to be able to do more than what the current settings in our policy enable as well. So there was a variety of feedback we had in there as well, positive and negative impacts.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I might just add to that to say that our iwi partners, and actually I think we've had people come to the table, particularly from Otaki, to share stories of the harm that has been, or is, I'll say is not has been, is happening to the environment in some areas where freedom camping is happening at the moment. And I think the point that Leslie made earlier about the policy being educational focused and in some ways not allowing us further grit, if you like, to handle things slightly more seriously. I think it is meaning that we can't address some of the concerns that are being raised, and I think in Otaki in particular, it's becoming more of an issue from a longer term perspective, and we, other than just talking about what we're doing now, I'm not sure that there appears to be any short term solutions that would address some of the issues for the, and I'm going to say Otaki as a local community as a whole, if I use that as an example.
Cam?
Thank you. So to answer your question, do you agree with the approach? Yes, that's an easy one. Yeah, so Kathy, in terms of particularly the Otaki River mouth, there's been people doing number ones and number twos in the grass next to the water because they can't be bothered, or sometimes they're too drunk to walk the 200 metres to the Greater Wellington toilet that's there. There's locals that feel like they're getting forced out, but we've also got issues with people, like there was one anecdote where someone's come to the Wānanga for 6 months, so they just lived at the beach for 6 months. And whether that's appropriate or not, or whether there should be better places for them, is part of the question. Just a question for you, Hamish. In regards to the ambassadors, I've seen them walking around and they were doing a really good job. In fact, quite brave, given there are some interesting people camping at the Otaki River mouth. What sort of feedback have they been giving to us in terms of how effective they feel their job has been?
So, Sean's light still on? Right, you come first, and then Sean, can you wait for a minute?
Yeah.
Please.
Oh,
So just wait for that red light because we're live streaming. That won't help. There's others in the queue. You all right? Everybody else turn your
well,
lights on.
everyone else will have to as well.
Everybody's got a light on. Just turn it off for a minute. Yeah. There we are.
Good afternoon. To answer the question through the chair, the ambassadors were largely gathering information for us about the usage of the sites. So a lot of the information they were passing back to us related to how many vehicles were at each site and over what period of time they were staying. So they were collecting number plates. There was a number of interactions with different drivers at different times with regards to finding out if they were planning on staying any longer and just general information around the district as well. So there's a lot of different messaging that the ambassadors were doing, but a lot of it was just kind of highlighting what our expectations were about the usage of the sites and where to find other places to go if they were staying too long or intended to stay longer, or that kind of thing.
Great. So I think Sean had a further response to Kathy's question. Is that right? Or?
It was just a follow up to Kathy. Yeah, Kathy. So the parking is a constant issue across the district with the changes that have come through in terms of the planning elements and residential areas. But we are getting regularly. We get complaints, a lot of complaints. Paraparaumu Beach, parking down there, the waterfront, Raumati, parking in that area. So there's absolutely a lot of pressure that's generated by the number of these vehicles that stay at those sites for lengthy periods of time. There's even had caravans there that detach the vehicle and then park both vehicles there. So there's the issues specific. Otaki's got quite a specific issue there in terms of scale, but there's definitely those localised parking and amenity in terms of public toilets and accessibility and proximity to town centres, and where you would prefer to have residents parking or people that are using those facilities as opposed to the freedom camping vehicles. So all of those are sort of constant source of work.
Hence the need for a bylaw, which is what we're here to discuss today. Jocelyn?
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. So, the consultation which is going to occur, is that going to be with locals, or is that going to be through some of these freedom camping groups? Who's actually going to be directed with? To
So basically, we follow the special consultative procedure under the LGA, which is basically public consultation. So we do have our stakeholder list, and we'll identify to them, our consultation is now open, and invite them to share links and things like that. So that's everyone basically. So community, interest groups, fully to everybody. Yeah, EV partners. Yeah. Yep.
and including those people who do actually freedom camp in their camping
Yeah,
grounds?
yep, definitely. Like NZMCA is one of our key stakeholder groups, and obviously they can communicate to their members when that's open as well. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So given that there's a delay in this registration, is that actually going to be detrimental to our environment? Particularly when this freedom camping bylaw potentially could be delayed, or could be extended to what you'd hoped?
I mean, we're still working through the details, but initially the transitional period looks to affect the national licensing regime and local, not local, but all freedom camping self-contained vehicles being registered. So I guess with regards to us, as Leslie mentioned earlier, the bylaw itself is looking to introduce, or the proposed approach around the proposed bylaw is looking to introduce those rules to help manage that use. What we can work out from the changes proposed to date is that just means that will apply to both those who are currently certified, which is that very small list that Leslie said within the period, but anyone else who has got one of the previous self-certified processes. So the current policy and the freedom camping legislation has been changed to reflect self-contained. So it'll still continue to do that. It'll just, from what we can understand, it'll just include self-contained from across both the previous and the certified processes. So it shouldn't affect the development and use and application of a bylaw to address the issues we're facing now.
But I suppose in the meantime, it's about talking to people rather than actually having a bit more control over people who are breaking the rules.
The policy approach, until we change that, maintains that educational process with some ability to follow up, but more limited.
Okay. So in terms of these questions, I'm happy with this bylaw approach. I think this is, it's been something that I've thought would be useful for a long time. In terms of the names, so it's got camping in public places bylaw. So to me, that actually, yes, tents, whereas that's not necessarily included in that, or would it be? I'm just trying to understand what.
Yep, so tents do come under the definition of freedom camping, so it would, tents will be, we haven't gone into detail tents, but that when we come back to talk about sites, camping in a tent will be included in that in terms of if there's any sites at all we think are appropriate for that,
Right.
because that falls under that umbrella definitely. Yeah, I think that camping in public places example is, I think that's possibly Auckland, or I can't remember. Yeah.
Okay, we can talk about that later. I suppose in more details later. Okay, thank you very much for that.
Martin?
Yep, got a few questions. So policy is educational versus bylaw being enforcement as such. So if we were to move from, say, the policy to bylaw, what's the pros and cons, I guess, of having a policy and bylaw versus just a bylaw? Is there any, what are the negatives? Or is it just doubling up sort of thing?
Yeah, I think, pretty much. I think pretty much, policy kind of provides, what your stance is or guidelines, for example. Bylaws has been a bit more specific about exactly what that is. As I was saying, looking at best practice around the country, there's currently only 2 other councils in the country that only have a policy, and a handful that have a policy and a bylaw. So, moving forward based on the legislation and what we can put in a bylaw, we can pretty much get all the messaging through a bylaw.
So all the
Yeah.
stuff that you'd have in a policy, you'd have in a bylaw,
Yeah.
setting the scene, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then, but you've got obviously the laws tied into that as
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
well. Okay, that's cool. Bylaws mean enforcement. So are we okay that we, will have the capacity to enforce the bylaws? Because I get that question many times: is if we're going to put a bylaw in place, we're going to create rules that need enforcing. They've got to be enforced. Otherwise, what's the point of having the rule? As such, and that there's obviously costs associated with that as well. One, I guess, first question is there any way to recoup that cost? But two, I guess that's being factored into this.
Yeah, I think, as you're saying, I think that because we have an educational approach at the moment and our Freedom campers are aware of that, then they know they can flout the rules. But obviously, if we have a bylaw, we're hoping, that means hopefully we have more compliant campers to start with. But obviously, that doesn't take away from the fact that we'll have people still out there monitoring.
And I think as part of the process we're going through in developing the bylaw, we're being very clear about the implementation and site requirements that go with that. And then we've got the provisions and means to actually support and follow up on those. That's some of those additional powers that we seek, that we get by doing a bylaw under the Freedom Camping Act. So about enforcing the timeframes and the numbers on sites. And I believe, but Richard could jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, part of the powers that we do get by having a bylaw under the Freedom Camping Act is the ability to issue infringement notices or tickets. So that's where people do something wrong. Following up on that.
Richard's nodding. I just want to add to this though and say, I think you raise a really good point, Martin, to query. How would this be funded? In other parts of the country, when you freedom camp, you pay, and that does recover the cost of whatever system you have in place. So we will need to come back to you to talk about how this would be funded. And it's kind of along the lines of user pays or ratepayers pay at this stage. And so we would need to have that conversation with you about those implications and what kind of user fees or charges would sit alongside being able to reasonably enforce this kind of policy and the relevant roles involved in that as well. So, who we partner with and what we do. So this is just the first part of it to say there's two different avenues, or three if we did hybrid. We're saying to you we think this is a better opportunity, but you're right, we do need to come back to you and talk about the money and how we manage that.
Cool. You had a slide there that talked to restricted and prohibited sites, and you had in brackets self-contained. Does that mean self-contained only in those sites?
Yeah, so that enables self-contained camping unless you restrict or prohibit. But then if you want to enable, you can then also enable not self-contained. So we have considered that as well, not just self-contained, but also not self-contained. So when we come back, we'll talk about any sites we identified that might be appropriate for not self-contained camping as well, which would be, for example, close to, amenities, toilets. So we have definitely considered both. It's just managed differently under the Act. One's enabled automatically and the other you have to enable through a bylaw.
Cool, thank you. Regards to your booking system, which you touched on, I just think it's more consideration. But my thing would just be worried about it. Look, that could be very good in a high use area, but in a non-high use area, I've got a bad habit of turning up to places late and trying to find a booking system that's already closed off, and then it's got to be enforced. In other words, who's going around and making sure that those seats, those are remaining empty, side of things as well. So that can be quite a costly process. And so you, to correct me if I'm wrong, you're sort of wanting to have this in place by next season? That sort of stuff, because that's towards the end of 25? Yep.
Yes.
Maybe pop the timeline back up?
Yeah.
Is that a good idea?
I've got it here.
Here we go.
I didn't see a stretch into 26, did I?
So, and those go 25, 26?
Yeah, that's I just saw the new operational
Did go
process
into
25, 26, but
In terms of that, by that summer, so that summer season, so yeah.
okay, that's cool.
And that's if we can. So obviously we'd need to give people advance notice of any changes. We can't just head into summer and go, hi, new year, new me. So we'd be wanting to build in how we get to that point.
Cool. And regards to the name, Responsible Camping in Public Places bylaw, my personal opinion is drop the word freedom because it's misleading. Feedback I've had over the years is that a lot of
We're
international
not
guests.
adding freedom, we're taking it away.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was responsible camping. Well, it never was free camping. That was the problem, is a lot of people came in from overseas thinking it was free camping and getting a hell of a shock when they realised it wasn't. That caused a hell of a lot of problems with people as such. So it's not freedom camping. There's nothing free about it, which is fine. Some places you might only pay a nominal cost and as such, but to me it's responsible camping in public places. Just my 10 cents. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Liz?
Can you put the list of names back up? I definitely think the bylaw is the way to go because people can be quite rude and aggressive, and I know certainly at Te Horo where people have challenged, some people camping on the seafront, they've got quite stroppy, so there needs to be something enforceable. It shouldn't be freedom camping because it sends the wrong message. My vote would go to camping in public places. The reason being that you can't actually regulate people to be ethical or responsible. That's the law is the law, and then ethics and responsibility and values are a different thing, and you cannot regulate that. You can't say to people you have to be responsible. That's something that comes from their own values, and I think it's just cut and dried. This is the Camping in Public Places bylaw. We encourage people to be responsible and sustainable and all the rest of it, but you can't actually legislate people to act in a responsible, ethical, sustainable way. So yeah, Camping in Public Places bylaw for me.
Right. They do all have camping in them. Is everybody happy with the word camping? Doesn't imply a tent or anything like that. Thank you very much. It seems like we have general agreement around that proposed approach. So go for it. We look forward to next steps. Thank you.